It's that time of year again. How many games did you play throughout this last year? It's honestly kind of insane just how packed with long-awaited sequels and surprising original titles 2025 was. But if you're anything like us, then you're likely not just playing games that only released in this year. As is tradition, let's look back and reflect upon the games that we played in 2025.
Whether you bought one or you didn't, there's no denying that the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 will be remembered as the most significant gaming event of 2025. And the first thing that I wanted to do in this episode was give a shout out to the 3 third-party physical games that I've bought for Switch 2 thus far: Cyberpunk 2077, Rune Factory Guardians of Ozma, and Hades 2. These games are all fully playable directly from the game card should you be unable to download any patches, and I'm trying to make it a point to support true physical releases like these on Switch 2, even if I could have a higher end experience elsewhere. Heck, I have the first Hades on PS5, but bought Hades 2 on Switch anyway. I don't mind the mismatch, and I still need to play both. Don't worry though, Coury played a ton of Hades 2, so you'll get to hear his thoughts later on. As for Rune Factory, I have no idea how soon I may or may not be able to finish it, but I feel like I'm pretty far into the story and have been enjoying going back to it here and there. It's a great game to play while traveling or winding down. It's not challenging at all, even when set to hard, but what surprised me most of all is how it scratches the same itch as Animal Crossing. Plotting out where to put fields, buildings, decorations, sculpting the land, and seeing my vision for it slowly emerge over days of play is pretty satisfying. So yeah, I don't mind keeping this one on the back burner as something to go back to that's just a bit different from what I normally go for.
This is where things get a little weird.
Of course, Cyberpunk 2077 was the highest profile third-party Switch 2 launch game. And honestly, I'm more than happy that I kept putting off buying it until this version. For one, the PS5 Ultimate Edition has a download code for Phantom Liberty, but for Switch 2, Phantom Liberty content is on the game card. Though my understanding is that the Xbox version also has all content across 3 discs. But also, the Switch 2 version seems to be the only one to support gyro aiming. I will gladly take a hit to fidelity and frame rate to get those sweet fine-tuned gyro aim adjustments.
Good one!
I also liked how this was a good opportunity for the Pro Controller grip buttons to win me over. Putting the primary interaction button Y on GR helped so much. And I also liked how I could use a wireless USB trackball for navigating the menus. By the way, I played in the 120Hz 40 FPS mode, which is why my footage is a bit choppy in this 60 FPS video. It's absolutely not a totally stable 40 FPS, but it benefits you often enough, so I think it's worth it. Really, this game let me enjoy so many features all at once that were big novelties to experience on a Nintendo platform of all things. Cyberpunk isn't an aesthetic that I always gravitate toward, but I do have to say that this game won me over. Maybe it's not the most fair comparison, but I definitely liked it a heck of a lot more than Fallout 4, which I played last year. There's certainly a lot less going on here in terms of possible world interactions, but in other areas, I'd say that Bethesda has some catching up to do with CD Projekt Red. Maybe one of these days I'll finally play a Witcher game.
I'll drink to that.
Throughout this episode, you'll see how well Coury and I did or did not do in finishing our pledge games for 2025 or cleaning up what remained of our ill-fated pledge lists of 2023 and 2024. The first 2 pledge games that I want to go over were, without a doubt, the 2 that I was the most intimidated by, but for wildly different reasons. I don't necessarily consider myself to be great at games, but I do like to be challenged, and I am stubborn, so I had no doubt that I could eventually force my way through Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, a carryover from my 2024 pledge list. There are steep challenges here that separate Sekiro from other From Software software. Namely, that there is no online play and thus no summoning help for bosses. And also that the game is designed to reward you for parrying, a mechanic that sometimes works for me in games, but more often does not. In this case, it did not. Sekiro is also so stingy with character progression and is less of an RPG than the Souls games. 1 strength up per major boss, 1 vitality up per 4 minor bosses, skill trees and sub-weapons that give you only a minor edge, no main weapons or armor to find, buy, or upgrade. So get good, as they say, or suffer. Like all of these FromSoft games, except for maybe Dark Souls 2, the world is pieced together in such a beautifully coherent way that makes them incredibly compelling to discover and explore. But with such limited methods available to you to overcome its challenges, well, the moments of fun can be fleeting. I love coming out the other end of a tough challenge, but if this doesn't sound like the fun kind of hard to you, and it mostly was not for me, then I don't necessarily recommend holding yourself back from playing Elden Ring before finishing Sekiro like I did. I was similarly daunted by my 2023 pledged playthrough of The Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel, but for very different reasons, as you might imagine. I'd previously played Trails in the Sky on PSP, which had very enjoyable characters and music, but I wasn't too into the gameplay, and felt burned by the cliffhanger ending, which had poor prospects for an English language resolution at the time. Well, whether Falcom fans think I made the right choice here or not, I did later buy the Cold Steel games, so that's where I was determined to give the Trails series its second shot. This particular Trails arc's biggest issue is its huge cast of, honestly, mostly interesting characters, but they're almost all introduced straight off the bat since it's a military school type plot, and, well, they're your classmates and your teacher, and they're all important party members who constantly have to weigh in on every little situation and speak every half-pondered thought that enters their heads.
Dad? Huh. I've seen him in the Imperial Chronicle before.
Governor Regnitz, one of the Reformists' most influential voices.
So this is Machias's father.
Man, it really reinforced for me that while world building and character development are nice to have, I prefer those things to be embedded in writing that also advances either the plot or serves the gameplay. The problem here is that, I don't know, maybe more than 80 or 90% of the text serves little purpose other than to endear you to the characters. And yeah, they're not a bad bunch. I rather like them, really, but I'm not playing RPGs to find a waifu or fanfic material. No judgments if that's you, but that's just not me. Me? I just want a well-paced story. I want to see what happens next. And, well, what happens next is the next game. Nearly the entirety of Trails of Cold Steel 1 is world building and character development. It's almost entirely set up for the conflict in the second game, and, yup, ends on a big old cliffhanger. So then, even though I knew my reaction to Cold Steel was admittedly about what I feared it might be, I knew that there would never be a better time to strike while the iron was hot and see if Trails of Cold Steel 2 offers any kind of payoff. But you see, as I played the first game, I developed coping strategies that made it more palatable to me, which I carried into the second game from the first minute. I assured myself it's okay to stop talking to every NPC if I'm sick of how much they have to say. it's okay to advance text after I read it, but before the voice finishes. It's okay to stop doing side quests if they're adding nothing of interest to me. And it's okay to use turbo mode, though I'd argue that a turbo mode even being desirable to exist in the first place is problematic, but I did start to lean hard on it, even though it's in my nature to resist such things. For the first game, I was locked into normal difficulty before I realized I'd rather just blow through it, but for part 2, I also told myself it's okay to play games on easy. All these things go so against the grain of how I feel I should play games, but you know what surprised me? Even though I was rushing it in a way that has probably made many a Trails fan curse my name, I found that I'd kind of made my own game out of getting through it as quickly as possible while still following the story, and that was kind of a fun challenge in and of itself. I mean, it does help a lot that Cold Steel 2 is a game where actual stuff happens, but having that sort of hopeful target of beating the game in under 30 hours as opposed to the 65 hours of the first game and striving for that was unexpectedly compelling. And I did make it in under 30 hours. I always want to try to enjoy a game in the idealized way that the developers perhaps intended or at least hoped for, but perhaps I've learned something here about just doing what feels right and not getting bogged down in what I think I should be doing.
Let's move. We'll cut our own path.
So, where does this leave me with Trails? Well, I was ready to write it off as officially not for me, but I was finishing Cold Steel 2 right around when the Trails in the Sky First Chapter remake came out, which, wow. I played the demo and it's night and day compared to Cold Steel. Dialogue is snappier thanks to starting with only 2 characters, the modern Trails blend of action combat for easier enemies if you want, and surprisingly slick turn-based battles is honestly sublime. It's so fun compared to anything in Cold Steel 1 or 2, and that's to say nothing of the vastly streamlined NPC interactions and superior orbment system. But please understand, I don't think I'm ever going to feel compelled to play all the Trails games at this point. But you know, the arcs that have gameplay like this? I mean, Daybreak is like this too, right? Yeah, I think I might be down for those. Anyway, you know, I always group Trails and Yakuza together in my head because they are both dauntingly large series with interconnected stories, devoted fans who want you to also be a fan, and lots of opinions on where one should start. It's always surprised me that Yakuza fans tend to push newcomers toward playing Zero first. I mean, how often are prequel stories so lauded as to become the new de facto starting point? That is quite an achievement, but I would caution that I played Yakuza 0 myself a good several years ago, but since then I'd kept putting off continuing the series despite being interested in the story, because Yakuza 0 was really long, longer than most Yakuza games I've since learned, and the gameplay wasn't exactly my favorite. Well, all these years later, Coury, having been catching up on the series himself, challenged me with Yakuza Kiwami as his pick for my 2025 pledge list. So, how did it go? Well, Kiwami, which is a remake of the first game in the series, is built on the same engine as Yakuza 0, and the gameplay is pretty much exactly the same. I'd hoped that I'd be able to see this style of gameplay with fresh eyes this time around, but I quickly found myself feeling just as I did with 0. Compelled by the distinctive contrast of extremely serious crime drama mixed with complete goofball scenarios elsewhere, but utterly disinterested by the prospect of engaging with the gameplay at all. So after about 5 hours, I decided I wouldn't. I switched the game to easy so that I could just mindlessly mainline it and finished in about 16 hours. This was absolutely the right choice for me for this one. I felt so good about my momentum that I figured I'd go ahead and play through Yakuza Kiwami 2 immediately after. Since this game is part of the next phase of the series, powered by Sega's Dragon Engine, I decided to give the gameplay a chance, so I started on normal. While the introduction of the Dragon Engine did come with a drop from 60 to 30 frames per second in the PS4 versions, I very quickly accepted the trade-off because not only do the Japanese cities look so much more real to the point that it feels like virtual tourism, but the quality of the combat and new experience point system changed the gameplay loop up to be so much more compelling than anything I'd experienced in the series yet. I got completely hooked and was helpless to do anything else as I played through the whole thing in just 2 days. This time, normal mode was maybe just a bit too easy actually, but it was still really fun to play. So now I at least actually have hope that the rest of the Dragon Engine brawlers, including Yakuza 6 and the Judgment games, should also be pretty fun for me to actually play, and not just fun for the story only. Zero and Kiwami may both be logical starting points, but don't let people's burning passion for this series overinflate your expectations for their gameplay. Just play the more rough around the edges entries on easy and look forward to better things to come, because Kiwami 2 finally made me a believer too. I'm also happy to now have Yakuza Kiwami 3 to look forward to, since the ancient Yakuza 3, even with the PS4 version, would probably be even less fun for me than Kiwami 1 or 0.
Dang, I hope that you're not Yakuza'd out already, because while I only normally play 1 or 2 games in this series a year, in 2025, I decided I was just going to play as many as I felt like before I was ready for a break. These games, I tell you, it's crazy how after 30 to 50 hours, you might be over it, but they always seem to end in such a way where you immediately want to jump into the next one. Let's start with Yakuza 5. I've been looking forward to this one since finishing 4 last year, which ended up being my favorite entry in this series to date. But word on the street was that this one is a lot longer than any of the entries before. I mentioned last year that 4 seemed like the game that they really figured out what they wanted the series to be, and 5 is where they fully let themselves play in the world that they've created. If you thought that the 4 characters in Yakuza 4 was too much, there's 5 characters you have to get acquainted with on this go-around. 3 of them, Kiryu, Saejima, and my personal favorite, Akiyama, are carryovers from 4. While series mainstay Haruka finally gets her time in the spotlight with rhythm game segments, and the disgraced former baseball player Shinada rounds out the cast. The ambition and scope here is truly impressive, but it's also kind of annoying because there's a mini-game for just about every activity, and it never lets up. From hunting down giant bloodthirsty bears to street racing. It's clear that luxuriating in Japanese culture, activities, and tropes are what they had in mind, but I really started to run out of steam with the final character switch. With Yakuza 5 ending on a relative cliffhanger, it was time to jump back in time for what is generally considered to be the fan favorite game, the 1980s set prequel, Yakuza 0. Immediately, I was just amazed at how good Yakuza 0 looks. I guess after the previous 3 games being remasters of PlayStation 3 entries, I hadn't played a more modern day entry since 2022. Even though it uses the same engine as Kiwami 1, the art direction of Kamurocho in the 80s is just off the charts with the hazy glow of neon signs combined with the dense yellowing of pollution. It had so much personality, and clearly the team felt reinvigorated by this setting. Since I first started my journey with the series, I've had a ton of people tell me that I should have just started with 0, but I decided to stick to my guns and play them in release order, only substituting 1 and 2 for Kiwami 1 and 2. I think this approach really paid off. Not only was it great to see a more serious, sullen side of a broken and chained Majima after full knowledge of what was revealed in Yakuza 4, but I also thought it was better to see Kiryu and Nishikiyama as close friends with knowledge of what will eventually transpire years later, and the long-term effect that it has on him. The emotional payoff is truly great for both characters, and Yakuza 0's reputation is very much earned. Oh, and I have no intention of playing the director's cut based on the ill-advised additions that seem to have been made to its story. 55 hours in Yakuza 5 and 46 in Yakuza 0. Okay, sure. I'll dive into Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, the next day. The general consensus seemed to be that this one isn't that great for a number of reasons, from the team learning to work with a new Dragon engine, but also navigating what was considered to be the end of Kiryu's story. Being back on the Dragon engine hits so hard, even though I had to get used to the frame rate hit from 60 to 30. Kamurocho has seen a number of architectural upgrades during the 4-year time jump between Yakuza 5 and 6. I also love the new area, Yokohama, and the obvious Shenmue vibe that went along with that setting. Also, after the detour into the past with Yakuza 0, it was incredible to reconnect with a lot of these characters. From a now grown-up Haruka to a once again down-on-his-luck Akiyama, there's a nice payoff for those who have stuck with the series up to this point. And you know what? It might just be my favorite of all the brawler-based games. And with that, I'm caught up on the original series. Well, outside of the spin-off games, so I could finally explore some of the post-Yakuza Like a Dragon games. The heck with it. Let's jump into Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name. I need to tread very carefully here because I don't want to give much away, since the story of the man who erased his name takes place concurrently with Yakuza Like a Dragon and intersects with certain characters and events in that game. Kiryu is now working for a secret agency under the assumed name Joryu. But as we've become well aware of by now, a man as well renowned as Kiryu is nearly impossible to hide. The big thing here is we finally get a 60 FPS brawler in the Dragon engine, and man, it is incredible. Joryu has a bunch of gadgets to fight with that spice things up, and results in some hilarious situations with the physics of the Dragon engine. For a supposed side game, the climax and ending here is insanely possible. There's an absolutely stellar voice acting performance by Takaya Kuroda at the end that should have won awards. If you feel that the emotional hit of 6's ending didn't send off Kiryu in an appropriate way, then I think you're going to be much happier here. There's a sub-story in The Man Who Erased His Name that features a character named Kaito, who is from the spin-off game series Judgment. With that in mind, I figured that I may as well give the first game in that series a shot. Taking place during the 4-year gap between Yakuza 5 and 6, Judgment is very much a true crime drama in the city of Kamurocho. Because the main character, Takayuki Yagami, is a former lawyer turned private investigator, he has to work within the confines of the law as much as he can. This provides an interesting contrast to the mainline games because it's now a chance to view the city through the lens of someone who follows the law. To be clear, I haven't finished Judgment yet. I'm currently stuck in Chapter 4 because it has a much slower pace than your typical Yakuza game. I'll make sure to finish it in 2026 though. Alright, that's enough Yakuza for this year. And now, let's pivot over to something completely different. I went into A Plague Tale Innocence knowing exactly nothing about it, outside of it being well liked by those who played it, and that it was around 10-ish hours long. I can honestly say that I was not expecting rats. Lots and lots of rats. I can't think of the last game that made my skin crawl like this, and the DualSense's haptics sure as heck weren't helping. It's fascinating that this is from Asobo Studios, who I knew primarily from Microsoft Flight Simulator. Set in Europe during the 14th century amid the Black Plague and 100 Years' War makes for a pretty unique setting. There's a lot of gross and terrifying stuff in here. But ultimately, I was pretty happy that Innocence was on the short side because the two main gameplay mechanics, stealthily avoiding or killing guards with your slingshot and using light sources to avoid hordes of rats, wears thin by about 75% of the way through the game. It can often feel very trial and error, and it doesn't help that your weapons are sort of awkwardly handled. It does get pretty old by the end, but thankfully only the last couple of encounters become truly obnoxious.
What's all the noise?
What was that? What's that?
So I bought the Plague Tale collection, and after the credits rolled on Innocence, I figured, hey, why not dive into the second game right away? A Plague Tale Requiem takes place less than a year after the first game, in a different part of France. Immediately following the first game, the bright and sunny atmosphere provided a nice contrast. But it doesn't take long for things to go awry. The team at Asobo Studios knew where they wanted this game to go, and they were fully locked in on delivering a cohesive vision. This is a bigger and better game in every sense. That this is considered merely AA as opposed to AAA is insane to me, because the production values are through the roof. Artistically, this is one of the best looking games I've ever seen, with the only downside is the frame rate cut from 60 to 30. But it didn't take long for me to adjust to that. At its core, the gameplay is similar to the previous entry, but is more varied and open-ended with flourishes that simply make logical sense. Like now you can pick up and throw burning sticks to light other fires. They really let you take the reins here, which emboldens you to improvise with surprising results. The puzzles are significantly better, and there's multiple layers at play, so when you pass through a particularly difficult section, you feel pretty good about it. Based on the next game currently in development, it seems as though we're going to be following a new set of characters, and that makes me really happy. The climax of Requiem has a sense of finality to it. There's plenty to mine from the setting and world that doesn't require the presence of Amicia and friends. These people have seen enough death and have been through enough torture at this point. Let's let them rest.
What's going on? What did they do to you? No!
And with that, we've arrived at my first 2025 pledge list entry. Try challenged me to play through the 2023 Resident Evil 4 remake, which I unbelievably hadn't played yet. I like Resident Evil 4 well enough, but I'd only ever played through the game once in my life. The PlayStation 2 version at that. As memorable of a game that RE4 is, I was pretty shocked at just how little I remembered about the story. And even when I did recall something, I thought it was at a totally different point in the plot. I think that had a big influence on my overall enjoyment because it pretty much hit like a brand new game. I know that when it was first announced that it was being developed, people were unsure how necessary it was. Of course, with just how innovative the original RE4 was, means that the jump between the original and this remake was less apparent than with the previous remakes, which I suppose played a big part in why I put off playing it for so long. Still, if anything, the auto inventory management option justifies the existence of this remake to me in every single way.
What the hell's going on?
I played a few big releases on day one of this year, the first of which was the French JRPG Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This was a game that, for me, essentially came out of nowhere. I think I pre-ordered it a week or so before it released. I was in no way prepared for the hubbub that followed and put it in short supply for the next couple of months. There's just so much to love about Clair Obscur, and a passion for the genre drips from every pixel. I knew that this was something special right from the intro, but when I stepped out into the overworld that was reminiscent of a 32-bit era JRPG, the whole thing was elevated even further. This is something that I never ever thought I'd see again, and it gave me goosebumps. The environments, characters, and that soundtrack. This game keeps on delivering for 2/3 of its duration, meaning that it's certainly not perfect. By the end of the first act, I found myself getting sick of the battle system. And while the parry and dodge-based system is innovative for the genre and clearly resonated with a ton of people, I ended up dropping the game difficulty down to story mode. When even regular overworld enemies can decimate you with a few missed inputs, it annoyed me. I got sick of having to lock in and pay attention to the wind-up pattern of every single enemy in every single battle. Besides that, I also felt that the final act does a disservice to everything that comes beforehand. And that might be a divisive opinion to have, but I'll say that it just didn't work for me. Besides, it's not like I haven't played any new JRPGs in recent years for this to feel completely novel, but that probably helped keep it from being as impactful for me as it was for a lot of other people. Anytime a new release from Hazelight Studio hits, Try and I set aside time to enjoy whatever sort of co-op bliss they've concocted. Split Fiction was no different, and it proved to be just as special as their last two games, A Way Out and our Game of the Year 2021, It Takes Two. The innovation and efficiency of Split Fiction is something to behold. Their tradition of constantly introducing new gameplay mechanics, while never spending so much time with one that it wears out its welcome. That's been fine-tuned to perfection by now. The scene when one player has to fly a hoverbike through a futuristic dystopia, while the other one has to input a capture command to unlock a phone is so effective and hilarious.
Terms and conditions!
Self-destruct in 10 seconds.
Oh boy!
9,
What?
8,
Nothing!
7, 6, 5, 4,
3, 2, 1. Executing self-destruct.
Wait! Self-destruct! Well, come on, Zoe! Jump!
I think Coury and I will pretty much be playing any Hazelight games straight away from here on. They've just really got this whole co-op thing figured out. And with all the varied scenarios, you're always excited to see what happens next, with so many clever and intuitive gameplay concepts being fully explored throughout. As fantastic and creative as Split Fiction is, though, I think just because it was a platformer in the same vein as It Takes Two diminished the novelty just slightly. I mean, platformers are kind of my bread and butter, but even still, I wonder if there are other genres that Hazelight might be able to explore for their co-op titles so that they can keep things fresh.
And it's the first story I ever wrote.
Something that Coury and I both seem to be doing more and more often these days, as you've no doubt already noticed, is moving from one game in the series straight on to the next. You might think that you'd want a break after finishing one game, but it's somehow very enjoyable to just keep the momentum going and immediately see how the gameplay and presentation evolve. Knowing I'm a big fan of platformers, Dave Jackson of the Tales from the Backlog podcast asked if I'd join him for an episode about Psychonauts. And I said yes, because Psychonauts had indeed long been on my backlog, and I always appreciate a good excuse to kick my butt into gear and play something that I already should have finished long ago. I actually played just a couple of hours or so of Psychonauts on PS2 back in the day, but I just couldn't get into it at all. This time, I played the original Xbox version on Series X, although I do have to say that the higher resolution doesn't necessarily flatter the Nickelodeon-esque, gross-out, bizarre shapes character designs with their sickly skin textures. I'm now much more familiar with this game's lineage being tied to LucasArts adventure games than I was in 2005. And the writing and voice acting is just about best in class, especially for when it was released.
You know that cabin is empty, right?
Duh. I'm practicing for tonight, when it's gonna be full of ladies.
That kind of thing takes practice?
Excuse me, but my parents let me watch R-rated movies, so I think I know a little bit more about this than you do, okay?
That said, I really just don't think Double Fine was quite ready to make a 3D platformer. The controls, collision detection, terribly designed boss fights, and convoluted systems for depositing and redeeming rewards for collectibles leave this game to be entirely propped up by its delightful scenario design. The Milkman Conspiracy seems to be the fan favorite level, and I think that's in no small part due to it leaning more into Tim Schafer's adventure game roots over utilizing this game's platforming mechanics.
Hey, I'm just gonna walk through, okay?
Unless you have water for my plants, then we have no use for you in here.
Well, after finishing Psychonauts, I was dying to know, how big of a jump forward is Psychonauts 2? Well, holy moly cow, how far Double Fine have come. The excellent and hilarious writing and voice acting that was, well, the only particularly strong point of the first game is now supported by slick, top-tier 3D platforming action and exploration, even more wild and creative scenarios, and excellent visuals and animation. The models of returning characters don't gross me out nearly as much as the nasty old ones, and the new characters generally have more restrained designs that make me worry less about how well their organs are contained within their bodies. The best 3D platformers make me want to find everything their worlds have to offer, and this one most certainly did that. This is only the second Xbox game after Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom that I've made the effort to get all achievements for. I just can't say enough good things about Psychonauts 2. It's worth playing the first game just to get the full impact of the story here, but the payoff is well worth it.
Incredible! This is where the first Psychonauts met.
Ever since playing the 2013 Tomb Raider reboot, I've wanted to go back and give the original Tomb Raider games a serious try. But since I know that the controls in those are extremely technical and the games are challenging, I kept putting it off. Until putting the PS1 version of Tomb Raider 1 on my 2025 pledge games list. That's right, I dealt with the infamous single-use save crystals and all that. And let me tell ya, I loved it. I always loved the idea of how much this game demands from you in terms of platforming precision, but the key here is that Lara's movements are extremely predictable, and if you remember the lessons from the Croft Manor tutorial, you're mostly set up for success. Thanks to how precise the jumping is, I think it's an excellent example of a game where when you die, you almost always feel like it was your fault and not the game. The exception to that is the combat, which is pretty lousy, but it's not the focus. The locations that you visit over the course of the game are extremely memorable, and I think a big part of the reason that they feel instantly iconic is due to how much you have to carefully study your surroundings to successfully navigate them. Not every level was a winner, but on the whole, I was just super into finding my way through this truly classic game. While I understand why tank controls platforming didn't catch on more broadly, I honestly wish that Tomb Raider had led to a whole subgenre of 3D precision platformers like this. Continuing with the paired games trend, I thought that there would never be a better time to play Tomb Raider Anniversary than immediately after finishing Tomb Raider 1. This is the Xbox 360 version of this reimagined version of Lara's first adventure running on Xbox Series X, but it may not look super impressive since it's also available on PS2, Wii, and the like. Obviously, the game has become what is a more typical action-adventure for its day. Tank controls are out, and sticky hops between crevices are in, but I do think the game overall focuses on the right things to carry the spirit of the original. It's still very challenging to figure out how to proceed through a room, much more so than, say, Uncharted, where the climbing is mostly trivial. I loved seeing how key locations from the original were reimagined with more powerful hardware. Much like the Resident Evil remakes, it's familiar, but the level design is completely redone. Although, for better or worse, it is ultimately a more condensed and shorter version of the original game. It's no replacement for the experience the original provides, but it was enjoyable for me in its own way. Everyone keeps referring to the upcoming Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis as a remake of the original game, but as one of probably only a handful of people who experienced Tomb Raider Anniversary anytime recently, I'm pretty sure it is actually using Anniversary as the basis. Lots of level design elements specific to Anniversary and not the original looked real familiar to me in that trailer.
Some legends are destined to be retold.
You know, it might be a bit early in the episode to be making Game of the Year declarations, but who cares? I'm just going to go ahead and break some conventions here and get it out of the way because I've just now talked about some of my winners anyway. I always like to pick a new to me Game of the Year and a Game of the Year that actually released that year. Now, I haven't played Clair Obscur. That's a big regret for me for the year. Hopefully next year. Anyway, for new to me, I'm going to be a bit wishy-washy this time because Psychonauts 2, being a 2021 game, just feels too recent to really embody the spirit of that award. But it does deserve it, and so does the original Tomb Raider, which, as a game from 1996, is more the sort of game that I have in mind with this declaration. And since we can bend our own dang rules however we like, I'm saying that both Psychonauts 2 and Tomb Raider 1 are my picks for my top 2 new-to-me games of the year for 2025. So, what new release game gets my game of the year? Alright, I think this is going to be a pretty divisive pick, but hear me out here. I don't have a very competitive nature. I just don't. As such, competitive video games, much like sports and real life, rarely hold my interest. Mario Kart, however, has long been the one competitive multiplayer series that I get particularly excited about. I'm not the best, but I can hold my own. But most importantly, it's just fun. Fun with friends, fun against the computers, fun when I win, fun when I lose. Fun to work your way toward Rainbow Road, get all the gold trophies, and get 3-star ratings. So I say all this to say, all the negative discussion surrounding Mario Kart World just doesn't really register for me. I don't overthink the game balance. I don't overthink what modes I wish the game had. I don't post about what I think the game's update roadmap should look like and complain that the developers aren't patching in enough new stuff to keep me constantly engaged with this game, or any game. My view on this stuff is still colored by the multiplayer games I grew up with on N64. I mean, games were just released, and you could enjoy them for what they are, or just not pay attention to them and move on if you didn't. Sometimes they hit with your friend group, other times not so much. So anyway, Mario Kart World. I can kick back and have a good time with this one anytime. Just against the CPU, online with friends, whatever. I like traveling between tracks. I'm not married to the 3-lap formula, though it would be nice to have a mode that focuses on that for those who really love to fine-tune and maximize the cornering. But listen, I still think that the road between tracks is plenty interesting and exciting, with no shortage of opportunities to execute strategies to get ahead. So I don't know, I just can't relate to this campaign against this game's interconnected structure. And I don't mean to excuse the lack of compelling content or rewards in free roam mode. I mean, sure, it would be nice if that improves over the years, but I can't deny that that's sometimes the extent of what I have the energy for after an especially exhausting day, so it has its place. I think Mario Kart World is a beautiful game with excellent animation, a crazy good soundtrack, fun road trip vibes, excellent driving mechanics, and it will almost certainly be the one competitive multiplayer game that I continue to go back to over the course of the next decade. And for all that, honestly, I can't think of anything else that I'd rather pick as my 2025 Game of the Year. I'm glad I saved my first cow usage for this.
Yeah.
I wish that I had something interesting to say about Mario Kart World that wasn't just, well, it's another Mario Kart game, I guess. But yeah, the fact is, Mario Kart World has never been something close to my heart and occupies a similar space that Smash Brothers does. Meaning that I always find it fun to see what kind of stuff they put in there, but I never feel particularly compelled to play it regularly shortly after its release date. I don't even know if I'd have even bought Mario Kart World at the Switch 2 launch if it wasn't included. So instead, let me talk about a Switch game that I'm more excited about, Hades 2. After how much I enjoyed the first game last year, it took some considerable effort to avoid jumping into the early access version on Steam. I held out to the eventual version 1.0, and at that point, I figured I could just probably hold out a little bit longer until I got the physical Switch 2 cart. Nearly 60 hours spread across 89 run attempts, and the credits were rolling. Hades 2 takes all that was good in the first game and basically perfects it. I think I ended up liking Malinue a lot more as a main character than Zagreus, but I didn't like her witchcraft-focused weapon selection quite as much. Of course, everyone here is still hot as heck, with Nemesis being my personal favorite. But the hottest part is just how deft Hades 2 is at doling out unlockables, upgrades, and new gameplay variables. It's amazing just how much having 2 sets of levels to choose from keeps things from getting stale. Each set of levels has one area that eschews normal layouts and lets you roam free. As good of a roguelite as Hades 2 is, it's only bested this year by the incredible Absalom, a roguelike beat-em-up from Guard Crush Games. That team handled the fighting system of Streets of Rage 4. I never really messed around with a roguelite mode that was added in Streets of Rage 4's final patch, but I assume that was laying the groundwork for what Absalom turned out to be. This game, I'm telling y'all, it is so darn good, mixing several of my favorite games into one. Obviously the previously mentioned Hades and Streets of Rage 4, but also Golden Axe, Dragon's Crown, and even some Capcom Dungeons & Dragons games sprinkled in on top to make what is possibly my favorite game of the year. Every single attack and special move has a visceral feedback to it, which makes Absalom some of the most satisfying beat-em-up action I've ever felt. Juggling enemies is just so much fun. And there's just so much to do in here too. The world, regions, races, creatures, and cultures feel fully fleshed out as you discover entire new pathways, bosses, and even continents. Each of the 4 characters play completely different with unique skill trees. I hope, like with other roguelites, Guard Crush Games will feel compelled to add new material to an already stellar base game over time, and that'll keep me coming back for more. Way down on the opposite end of the roguelite spectrum is Whisker Squadron Survivor, a Star Fox rail shooter take on the genre. On paper, this sounds like something that would be a direct hit for me, and I bought it when I first found out about it. Alas, it didn't resonate with me at all, and was a near total disappointment. It's slow moving, and the levels themselves aren't especially interesting. I hope that it would be improved over time, as a lot of roguelites seem to be, but it still hasn't been updated since release. I'd like to see another dev take on this style of game with probably more success. Now, if you're looking for a much better rail shooter, you could do a lot worse than Rogue Flight. Despite the name, this is not a roguelite in any shape or form. This one seems to have flown under the radar since its release in 2024. But when I saw a screenshot, I immediately had to try it out. After testing out the free demo on Steam, I quickly ordered the physical PlayStation 5 version. This is a much more straightforward rail shooter, more in the vein of something like Afterburner, but with an 80s or 90s anime aesthetic. If you've ever wanted to play something that felt like, Macross Plus, dancing between enemy fire while launching volleys of missiles, this should hit the spot. It sure did for me. Another Yu Suzuki Superscaler era homage that made a big impression on me was the currently Steam exclusive Ashura the Striker. It seems that recapturing the Space Harrier formula isn't quite as easy as it would seem, based on Yu Suzuki's own Air Twister a few years back. But Ashura absolutely nails it with a level of precision that totally surprised me. It's fast, frantic, and beautiful, everything that Air Twister seemed to be lacking. Sure, it borrows more than its fair share from Space Harrier, but it also sprinkles in some inspiration from the excellent Afterburner climax. Now you can slow down time and take out multiple enemies at once, or use a charge punch and sock a dragon right in the nose. One more 3D rail shooter that I need to mention this year is M2's Night Striker Gear. Taito's original Night Striker is one of those games that seemed lost to time, but if you played it in the arcade in the 90s, surely you had fond memories of what is essentially amounts to a cyberpunk Space Harrier in a flying car, with an awesome Zuntata soundtrack. It's not like it does all that much to evolve the formula, outside of the gear transformation, but the pre-rendered sprite style fits perfectly, and the game runs great on the Switch. As much as I like the soundtrack, I'm not quite sure if the bombastic symphonic version of Zuntata music quite fits the vibe, but it's an interesting choice, that's for sure. Switching over to a more traditional style shooter, the unfortunately named Drainus from Team Ladybug marks a departure from their usual Metroidvania fare. For my money, Ladybug is creating some of the most beautiful sprite work in games right now, and that translates spectacularly to a side-scrolling shooter. For the most part, horizontal shooters tend to be underrepresented these days, and I was reminded of the glory days of Genesis and PC Engine shooters because Drainus isn't nearly as frantic of a shooter as we tend to see these days. It's slower and more methodical, which is hugely refreshing. Gameplay-wise, it's not really anything new or revolutionary, but that doesn't really matter. It's super fun, it looks and sounds great, and more people should check it out. But if we really want to return to the glory days of 16-bit shooters, Yuzo Koshiro shows us all what he's capable of with the Sega Genesis shooter Eartheon. Koshiro had been working on this for years, and it was well worth the wait when it dropped. From the incredible launch sequence against the Space Armada in Stage 1, its cup overflows with new and unique scenarios. Dropping into the atmosphere on a planet in Stage 2 just as the music kicks in is goosebump-inducing. Eartheon was built from the ground up on Genesis hardware, and it's constantly impressive. I mean, if this game was released in the mid-90s, it would have changed the course of history. Well, maybe that's a bit extreme, but I don't know. For all the aftermarket Genesis games that have been released over the years, none feel more authentic than Eartheon. I bought the game twice already, and will 100% be buying the cartridge copy when it goes up for pre-order. Towards the end of the summer, I decided to start taking our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/mylifeingaming a bit more seriously. I dabbled with this last year a little bit, but this year it really stuck. From 9 to 11 a.m., you can join me for Coury's Cozy Coffee Corner as I play a bunch of, typically stress-free games over a cup of coffee. The first game that I played this year was Natsumon 20th Century Summer Kit from developer Millennium Kitchen. Here, you play as a young boy who is part of a traveling circus during his summer vacation for the month of August. Explore the town, discover mysteries, and get to know the people. Catch bugs and fish and faff about. I actually started Natsumon last year, playing 1 day per real day, but fell off around August 15th. I returned to it with my live streams and was able to finish the game off with the last day coinciding with the actual real day. In the end, it was good enough, but I don't know if I have a lot of desire to go back and do a new game plus.
私は飛山さんじゃありません。私はあなたが知っている飛山さんの妹です。
After I wrapped up Natsumon, I discussed with the chat about what I should play next. Over a bit of deliberation, we decided that it was good for me to get out of my comfort zone and play Pokémon. Okay. So a little backstory, I guess, is Pokémon came out when I was in my second year of college, and I was so into PS1 RPGs at that point that there was no way that I was going to play that quote-unquote kiddie crap. In the years since, I'd occasionally give one a shot, but never made it out of the starting area. I decided to start with the most recent release, Pokémon Violet, which, thanks to the Switch 2, got quite a performance boost. So I'm going to group all the different Pokemon games I've played together in this section because to date I played 3 Pokemon games on my morning streams and I am totally into it. I started with Pokemon Violet, then took on Pokemon Legends Arceus, and then as of the time this video's release, I'm 6 badges into Pokemon Fire Red version for the Game Boy Advance. What is it that has totally turned me around on these games? My mind immediately jumps to a few reasons. But I think at the top of my list is something very simple, and that's streaming them and getting lots of help from the live stream chat as they backseat and help guide me along. This is something that I'm totally into and that I open myself up to freely. It's been so much fun simply because people know so much about the inner workings of the games and can easily help me navigate the potential pitfalls and tell me what kind of pokes are good and bad and useful. From the chat's perspective, I think they enjoyed watching me play these games because I don't have any of the baggage that seems to come along with being a fan. I'm not going to complain about this poke or that poke not being in the game, or hating the various changes or cuts the Game Freak may have made. Pokemon Violet is a pretty ugly game, but it didn't really bother me that much after I got into it. And I think that the chat found it refreshing to see someone accepting these games for what they are. After finishing a traditional style Pokemon, Arceus was a little challenging to get used to, but I really loved the real-time catching mechanic. Fire Red, the GBA remake of the first game, has been a real joy to play, even without some of the modern conveniences that come along with playing a newer entry first. I didn't find myself missing things like experience share nearly as much as I expected to. I think it's safe to say that I'm more or less a Pokemon fan now, but most of that really comes down to the fact that people have been tuning in to watch and help me play these games. In between streaming Pokemon Arceus and Fire Red, I took an unexpected detour into the dark fantasy world of Sanctuary with Diablo II Resurrected. Although not quite cozy in the traditional sense, I'd only ever watched my friend play this legendary game on PC back when it was new. Now, I played Diablo 3 years ago and found it to be alright, but wow, Diablo 2's reputation is 100% deserved. I played through the main story offline with an Amazon warrior named Gretchen and loved it. I mean, I loved it. Even though I really only allowed myself playing during the streams, I found myself thinking about it all the time. I'd forgotten how addicting the gameplay loop of gathering loot and weapons and items could really be. I only wish that Diablo 2 Resurrected had an option for couch co-op, but I understand how this would require a complete overhaul to the game. Once again, this experience was immeasurably enhanced by the chat guiding me along and giving me suggestions. Y'all are the best. Remember when there was this big backlash against Diablo 3 when it was first released because it was too colorful and cartoony? Well, after wrapping up 2, I have to say that backlash was probably deserved. It just looks wrong now. Way too much like World of Warcraft. Now that I played a little bit of Diablo 4, it seems to be a return to form in both style and gameplay. So I am definitely going to be getting into that one in 2026. Okay, I started this segment with a Switch 2 game, so I'm going to end it with one. Donkey Kong Bonanza was the Switch 2 game that I was looking forward to. This was a great game in so many ways, and was truly just an impressive showpiece for the tech. The way the destructible environments burst apart and morphed was such a cool hook, and I dumped a lot of hours into this one. The most impressive part of it was the fact that it just kept going, for better or worse.
Donkey Kong Bonanza is an incredible achievement and an incredible title. I just love that, Bonanza. I, for one, was surprised to see a 3D Donkey Kong platformer from Nintendo's Tokyo studio as the premier Switch 2 exclusive to be released in the console's first 2 months. The expectations for a game of such a pedigree and one of my favorite genres are, of course, going to be through the roof, and it's hard to put my finger on why, but Donkey Kong Bonanza was never really a Game of the Year contender for me. I don't know, maybe it's because the level design hit its best strides only near the end when I was already feeling the game was too long. Maybe it was just a bit too freeform in its terrain smashing gameplay for the concepts of each world to really shine. Maybe bananas are collected so rapid fire to the point that I was numb to it, or maybe the music just didn't hit like Nintendo soundtracks usually do for me. I'm glad they did this. I'm so glad Donkey Kong Bonanza exists, and it's pretty much unlike anything else, but I do prefer Nintendo Tokyo's Mario games. As for Metroid Prime 4, well, I really hate to admit it, but what a disappointment. As you'd expect from Retro Studios, the technical and artistic execution is top-notch. The game feels great to play, which I knew it would based on Metroid Prime Remastered. But it really doesn't feel like there was an idea here that was worth waiting the entire Switch generation for. This is just another decent sequel to Metroid Prime. The game certainly has its share of distinctive vistas and moments, but I can't help but feel cheated that 4 of its 6 primary biomes, jungle, magma, ice, and mines, are the same concepts from Metroid Prime 1. Volt Forge is a neat change of pace for sure, though a bit tedious to revisit due to how its 3 separate towers are structured. And Soul Valley, the desert, is a bit like Wind Waker's Great Sea if it were literally dried up of hardly any interesting places to stop at. While I wasn't as actively annoyed by the Marines being present as a lot of people were, Nintendo should know darn good and well that people never like it when Samus interacts with other humans. So why do this? I always thought that the Metroid Prime series ended because they were done with it. They were out of ideas. And I was okay with that. We didn't need a sequel. But here we are. We've got a fine game, Metroid Prime 4. But I think I was right. There's just so little evidence of inspired creativity here.
Congratulations, you found another key.
On the other hand, if you want to witness some of the most creatively alien worlds and creatures you've ever seen, check out Chilean developer Ace Team. I put the Eternal Cylinder on my 2025 pledge list, and it is absolutely one of the strangest games I've ever played, in a good way. The basic premise is that you control an ever-growing and ever-evolving family of creatures called Trebum, which can transform various parts of their bodies after consuming certain items. These might let you jump higher, float, resist cold, resist toxins, glow in the dark, detect desired items, store more items, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty extensive set of combinable transformations, and you can switch control between your varied family members at any time. It makes me think of a sort of game that you don't see much of anymore, like something that would have released as an exclusive on either PS2, GameCube, or Xbox, a high concept sort of pitch that magazines would have been hyping up because of the sheer number of possible custom creature abilities. Released into today's landscape, it's a bit obscure, but had it released 20 or so years ago, I'm convinced it would have become one of the most sought after games on the retro market. Anyway, the weirdness doesn't end with the Trebum. The titular Eternal Cylinder is always looming large, breaking through protective barriers as you progress through the game and raising everything behind you into nothingness as you push ever onward to survive. While it's not a particularly long game, maybe 15 or so hours, I did think its gameplay concepts would have been better served by a 10 or 12 hour runtime. It can be a bit janky for sure, but if you want to play something that is just so entirely different from the norm, I think the Eternal Cylinder is well worth checking out. This fall, I decided to follow Coury's example of streaming more consistently on our My Life in Gaming Twitch channel, with my main focus being what I call the indie afternoon. I buy so many physical indie games, more than I should, honestly, but don't make the time to play through them as often as I'd like. But by taking about 2 hours a day to play indie games on Twitch, that's starting to change, and it's been great. I first played through Berserk Boy, which is a pretty slick pixel art action platformer. Unfortunately though, my European physical copy was weirdly prone to locking up on Switch and Switch 2, but I managed to get through it and enjoyed it nonetheless. Apparently, people playing the digital version didn't have problems. I then decided to tackle Carrion, a Metroidvania inspired by monster movies like The Blob and The Thing, except you are the Blob. It definitely gets a lot of points for the concept, and the puzzles were decent, but it was often quite difficult to understand how to get anywhere or how locations were connected. But the indie game I played through on the Twitch streams this year that I most wanted to give a special shout out to is Another Crusade. It's not the most technically impressive game. The Switch version that I have at least runs very unsmoothly, and the writing is very stilted, at least in English. But there's a humble sort of charm here that instantly endeared me to it. As you've no doubt already noticed, Another Crusade is a love letter to Super Mario RPG, taking heavy inspiration from its perspective, battle system, structure, 90s quality CG textures, and populating the world with Geno-inspired wooden puppets for characters. Imagine, perhaps, what Square Enix might have made if Nintendo pulled the Mario license from them and they had to come up with their own typical fantasy scenario for the game instead. I mean, I guess you could call it generic, but there's something kind of cool to me about seeing Super Mario RPG stylings, but with standard fantasy fare like knights and wizards fighting goblins. The core RPG fundamentals are also quite strong, I'd say, with a satisfying sense of discovery, difficulty that's tuned just right and will actually challenge you, unlike Super Mario RPG, and pacing that keeps things moving from one thing to the next relatively quickly, though the final dungeon is perhaps a bit convoluted. At any rate, there is a demo for Another Crusade, and it's often real cheap on Steam, so give it a go and see if its earnestness wins you over too. Another RPG that hooked me with its retro vibes was Hironobu Sakaguchi's Fantasian. As soon as I started this at the very end of 2024, I realized that I hadn't experienced a game like this since perhaps Final Fantasy IX or Chrono Cross. A bit of this is due to the game's backgrounds, which are photographs of dioramas shot at various angles. It's a great idea and feels just like a modern version of late 90s pre-rendered CG backgrounds, although admittedly the effect has some rough edges in how it all comes together. I know I keep harping on pacing, but one of the things that stands out to me about Sakaguchi-produced games is the pacing. No one area in Fantasian is overly long, and soon enough you'll be fighting a boss and moving on. The combat is refreshingly straightforward, turn-based fare with the slight twists of dialing in your attack trajectory, often for optimized piercing of enemies. Bosses become extremely challenging in the second half of the game though, which largely involves further exploration of previously visited locations for side content. This part of the game does seem to be a struggle for a lot of people, but it reminded me of the later stages of Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI. For most of the toughest encounters, it was usually easy enough to see how my equipment and strategy could be tweaked for success, so I found this to be pretty satisfying actually. The story isn't Sakaguchi's best work, it's fine, but I enjoyed all of the characters, the Nobuo Uematsu soundtrack, and just loved the PS1 sensibilities and vibes that permeate the overall package.
All's well that ends well.
While I'm on a modern but retro JRPG kick here, one of the first things I did in 2025 was finish up the Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake. I loved this and would like for HD 2D naysayers to take a closer look at what they've done with this and the 1 and 2 remake because it's quite a different look from other HD 2D games, using fully modeled high detail environments and an appropriate level of color saturation for Dragon Quest, so it may be more to your liking. If you're receptive to it, I strongly recommend turning off all guidance in these games and turning it back on only briefly if you really need a nudge. When the guidance is on, it feels like the developers are trying to pretend this game is something it's not, turning it into what seems like a search for the next exciting story beat that never really comes. If that's what you're looking for as you go from waypoint to waypoint under the game's new guidance systems, then you're going to be let down once you start to realize that for most of the game, the plot goes something like, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if you had like a key that opened up all the red doors, and then like another key that opened all the blue doors, and you visited a bunch of towns and had a boat? And also you'd like to find like a few different colored orbs and talk to some folks that have heard rumors regarding where those things are? Because you see, the first 3 Dragon Quest games are, for the most part, not governed by tightly plotted event triggers like you might be used to. Rather, your options are expanded by exploration, key items, and new transportation. There are exceptions, but rather than being blocked because you aren't supposed to do this yet, you can most likely complete any and all important objectives in whatever cave or tower you stumble upon, even if you haven't been told to go there. Maybe there's some NPCs out there that exist to point you towards said cave or tower, but the majority of the time they exist only to inform, not to unlock the way. Certainly, some NPCs are the objective since they provide key items, but NPCs don't have to be just for world building, tutorials, and event triggers, you know. Pay attention to what they say and find your way based on that. You can even hit the start button to record the most recent string of text if you think it was important enough to reference later, along with a screenshot. A non-automatic quest journal. What a simple but effective solution. I thought that was amazing. It's like the digital version of the hand notes I wrote and crossed off during my NES playthrough, which I still have. And just like with that method, once you've exhausted all relevant recorded information, behold, you've somehow found yourself at the end of the game. Funny how that works, huh? So finding your way is the gameplay here. It is the story. And for me at least, I think that's very compelling. Another super early bit of unfinished business in 2025 was wrapping up Blinx the Time Sweeper, a 2024 pledge game. You might be fooled by Blinx's angry American box art face and association with Xbox, but this is actually a Japanese game that has more in common with early 80s Japanese arcade games than the early 2000s Western developed 3D platformers that flooded the market as the genre went into decline. For instance, the levels are bite-sized with a time limit, and the primary objective is simply to defeat all of the enemies and find the exit. It's essentially a 3-button game, and I appreciate the thought that went into making it so streamlined. But as interesting as I think the core of the game is, it's hard to recommend because, as unlikely as this may seem, Blinx is a candidate for the most brutally difficult game I've ever finished. Move over, Battletoads and Sekiro. It's all well and good for the first 3 worlds, but then it just seems like the designer's primary objective is to cause you to fail, with lots of situations where you can't proceed without having a specific time ability in reserve, or situations where there's barely enough trash available to shoot at the remaining enemies, and the 10-minute time limit is extremely tight in later worlds. And the final boss was brutal, although I eventually figured out that if you select retry from the pause screen, it restarts that specific fight instead of the whole boss rush, which is what you have to do if you actually die. So, all in all, Blinx is an infuriating but unique little game. I wonder what the sequel is like. One more 3D platformer and leftover 2024 pledge game was Jak 2. I thought it might behoove me to start this right after Blinx while my brain was still in early 2000s inverted horizontal camera mode. I initially skipped Jak 2 because I was so upset over the change in tone from the whimsical fantasy world of the first game to a dystopian futuristic city with Jak now being voiced angry and for some reason he now has guns and steals cars. Spoilers, that reason was Grand Theft Auto 3. Well, I don't know the true story behind its development, but it's hard to believe that this is really the game Naughty Dog wanted to make. The game still has its Looney Tunes cutscene animation and tries to be very silly. I mean, Daxter's obnoxiousness dial is never not set to 11. So with that mixed in with the dreariest setting you can imagine, I just don't even know who they thought this game was supposed to appeal to. I felt just like the despondent, downtrodden NPCs wandering all over the colorless streets as I headed to the next quest marker that was almost always on the other end of the entirely too large city from where I was currently at, with absolutely nothing interesting to do or look at between point A and point B. The missions are never particularly fun or otherwise compelling, and shoddy checkpointing makes them way more irritating than they have to be. So yeah, more than 20 years after its release, I thought I was ready to play Jak 2 and accept it on its own merits rather than simply being upset that they changed it, so now it sucks. Well, it does suck though, because they made a cynical, joyless game that has nearly no redeeming qualities.
Oh.
I intended to play Death Stranding 2 right away, but I ended up not getting around to it until a few months later. I liked the first game a lot for focusing so much on the challenges of navigating over rugged terrain while slowly making travel throughout the game world easier as you restore roads and build useful utilities. It was strangely compelling. And, well, so is Death Stranding 2. As I tend to do, I intentionally saw very little of the game before playing it, so there were a lot of surprises, including, well, it's kinda more of the same, isn't it? Sure, the game has a lot of added niceties and streamlining, but I was kind of assuming that Kojima would have some kind of unique hook to distinguish the second game a bit more from the first. Even if that was something as simple as no longer talking to holograms most of the time, or actually getting to go inside the Knot cities and see how people live. Nonetheless, I had a real good time, and I was surprised how compelling the story was because I thought the first game pretty much clarified everything, so I wasn't sure where it could go or what it could reveal. The climactic sequence, which I won't show here of course, is one of the wildest things I've ever seen in a game. It had me a hootin' and a hollerin'. Oh, I won't be forgetting any of that anytime soon, that's for sure.
I'm sorry, but what in the world is going on?
Nothing that makes any sense.
Even though I wasn't expecting anything profoundly different from Death Stranding 2, I think the way that it was able to streamline a lot of the annoyances out was all I really needed to get me fully invested. I got really addicted to the delivery gameplay loop this time because it just felt easier, but in a realistic way that made sense in the game world. Since a lot of the technology that was developed during Sam's first journey was built upon to make things easier, and that all culminates in the second game. Death Stranding 2 has some moments though. Approaching the plate gate with Caroline Polachek's title song building up behind you is just so good. Climbing to the top of the mountain and then being met with a giant moon, catching BTs like freaking Pokémons, and of course the entire finale sequence that Try alluded to. Still, it was interesting that many of the story elements in Death Stranding 2 felt like Kojima's like a greatest hits album. From a ship that looks like the head of Metal Gear Rex to a cyborg ninja and beyond. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, he just knew that people would love that kind of stuff. And Death Stranding 2, for all its eccentricities, is a crowd pleaser. But, listen, there's another walking game that I want to talk about. In many ways, it's the antithesis of Death Stranding and its sequel. I'm talking about my favorite game of the year 2025, Baby Steps.
Oh, God.
I played a lot of games for a much longer amount of time than Baby Steps. Heck, I still haven't finished Baby Steps. But there's no other game that I played all year long that brain-wormed me from the moment I booted it up like Baby Steps. I've never played anything like this. And I'm sure you're looking at this, and in video form, it looks very simple. You just walk this man-child named Nathan up the side of a mountain, and it doesn't seem like all that big of a deal because we're so used to controlling the most athletic parkour masters in our video games. There is not a single thing about Baby Steps that comes easy. The nuanced precision needed to take every single step means that you become acutely aware of every time you put your foot forward on this entire journey. Every new terrain represents a fresh hell, scarier than your typical horror game. You'll fall constantly. You'll hit your stride only to lose it in the most inopportune time and slide down a big slope, which usually ends with a spectacular view of Nate's enormously powerful glutes. Not only is Baby Steps about Nathan going through what he is and picking himself up and marching forward, but it's also about you, the player, picking yourself up and continuing on. Nate goes through it in this game, and you go through it with him. Every time that Nate laments his odd situation that he's in, you lament that you can't give up on him or yourself. You just gotta keep on taking steps and keep on keeping on. It's simultaneously sad, frustrating, exhilarating, and extremely hilarious.
Yeah, is that an apple?
Oh, smells good. Oh my God, that was so good. Oh, that apple really hit the spot. Oh yeah, apple!
This game, if you choose to play it, will take you through a gamut of emotions to the point where you'll have tears in your eyes from laughter to wanting to smash the controller into pieces, possibly all at the same time. But one thing is for sure, when you overcome something you've been stuck in for longer than you'd like to admit, you'll feel a sense of satisfaction that very few other video games will be able to match. It might be weird to call this my game of the year, but I think if a game makes you feel all these things, then it is something truly special.
This is, I got this map. Oh. It's got everything on it. Check it out. Seemed really good.
Oh, yeah, that looks all right.
I'm sure Jim meant to give you a copy. We should just get him over here.
Oh, no, that's
he'll come if we scream.
No. No, it's okay. I'm fine, Jim, I'm fine. It's fine.
Another game that really hit me at my core was 1000 Times Resist. Word was that this had one of the, quote, best stories in video games. It was released on PC last year, but arrived on consoles in 2025. I decided to buy the game sight unseen because it was like $15, so I went in completely blind. What I got was an interactive story that doesn't have a lot of gameplay per se, but it does have a really interesting story about the breakdown and extinction of the human race, and the beings that continue on afterwards. It was a bit slow moving at first, but it's worth sticking out. If you like the post-mankind technological melancholy vibe of the Nier games, I think you'll probably really dig this. You just move your characters around in a 3D world, not unlike your typical RPG. It's essentially like a RPG town, and you just talk to people. There's an occasional platforming section or puzzle, but really that's it. It's fascinating, but the story really stuck with me long after the credits. It's got a great soundtrack too.
You stole our immunity. You condemned us to this life. Why do you get to choose who lives and who dies?
One entry in my 2025 pledge list that I was really looking forward to playing was The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, since it was one of the few Zelda games that I'd never played before. It has a reputation for being a divisive game. Those who love it really, really love it. And those who don't, well, they tend to loathe it. I wondered where I was going to fall on that spectrum. I was immediately struck by a couple of aspects of Majora's Mask. Firstly, I love how creepy and melancholy the whole endeavor felt. Secondly, there is a lot to remember here. With Try's assistance during a live stream, I started the N64 version and felt like maybe I'd built up the whole time management aspect in my head so much, and hey, maybe I was able to get into this now. Over the following days, I started to become more and more frustrated due to my refusal to look up anything. I decided to pivot over to the 3DS version because they had a more detailed Bomber's Notebook to help track events, and there was a Sheikah stone that gave you hints if you're feeling stuck. That helped alleviate things up until I just ran out of steam doing the Zora egg hunt, and that was just excruciatingly not fun. The temple that followed had a similar, I hope I don't have to do this again. I started to think about how if a game makes you think, thank God I never have to do that ever again, over and over, then maybe it's a bit of a wash. Sorry, Majora fans. I'd have to say that my biggest takeaway from my time with Majora's Mask 3D is that I really miss bespoke portable consoles. Also on my pledge list was the ultra-expensive Sega Genesis Zelda-like Crusader of Senti. I got the Japanese version, Ragna Senti, when we were in Japan filming the M2 documentary, because the US version is just way out of reach. I played through the US version via the Mister. There's a ton to like about Senti. Its use of vibrant colors make it look a lot better than many of its peers, and the music is just 100% Yamaha YM25112 bliss. So it's hard to say why this game didn't really grab me. There was some time travel shenanigans late in the game, that I thought was very cool narratively. But that's really the only thing that sticks in my mind since the credits rolled. But you want to know a game was freaking great and had me enamored the entire time? Mega Man Legends. It's incredible just how well the visuals, vibrant colors that play to the strength of flat shading and expressive facial textures have aged immaculately. Initially, the controls just took some getting used to. I mean, hey, the developers were just working with the tools they had on hand, right? I hear that the second game has extremely modern dual stick controls for when it was released. But what really launches Mega Man Legends into orbit are the characters. I came to really love the Bonds by the end, and I can see why Trombone has such a following. I got a kick out of seeing her become more and more conflicted about her crush over Mega Man. You gotta make it a point to play the second game soon.
Hey, you! Thanks to you, everything's a mess now, isn't it?
Huh? Aren't you the girl who's being chased by that dog?
Shut up! I don't want to hear about that! Do you know what you've done?
And now, I gotta give a special shout out to Raw Danger on the PlayStation 2. Without a doubt, one of the most memorable games that I played all year. Raw Danger is the second entry in the Disaster Report series, which is known for its ambition, but also has an incredible amount of jank to muddy the waters a bit. Thankfully, that's something I get a kick out of. And I like this so much that it marked the first time that I streamed a headline game twice on our Sunday live stream show. I finished the first story, featuring the intrepid waiter Rod Danger, but I never looked much beyond that. I should get back to it.
Look, on the PS5 store, it's like $40 or something.
He's just hanging.
So
he's just hanging there.
Oh, there he is! Oh my gosh! He was there all along!
He's just hanging there
all along! All you just see is his hands in the tip of the hat! You can't even see his face!
On a whim, I had a hankering to revisit Final Fantasy 4, but I didn't feel like spending a lot of time, so I thought this might be a good opportunity to put some more time into the pixel remasters, thanks to their built-in experience and money modifiers. It's been probably 20 or so years since I experienced the full story of FF4. I think the last time I finished it was on the Game Boy Advance. In 2025, I was struck just how little fat there is in this meal. It's crazy that this game is just under 20 hours. Closer to 10 or 15 if you're using the 4X money and experience cheats. Once the village of Mist is burnt down, you're pummeled by one major event after another. And summoning the lunar whale from the depths of the sea still gives me chills. I followed FF4 with a quick playthrough of Final Fantasy 1, a game that I also hadn't finished since the Game Boy Advance, via the Dawn of Souls compilation. I had a nice time here as well, and it's actually a pretty easy platinum trophy, which can be done on one playthrough, and I decided to just do it. But I think replaying both of these games via the Pixel remasters was an enlightening experience. Once I got over the juddery scrolling, which is a travesty and I can't believe that's never been fixed, I found myself enjoying them quite a bit. I thought the redone sprites looked good enough, and some of the flourishes given to the background looked striking. But as good as these elements are, it made me come to the important realization that due to the very nature of these pixel remasters and how they've been developed, they've lost most of their visual identity. Seeing that evolution from the first game on the NES to the sixth game on the Super NES gives important context to the time that they were made. With Pixel Remaster, this is totally lost since they more or less look like the same game. Would you believe that I've only completed Shadow of the Colossus once? 2025 was a great opportunity to correct that mistake, while also checking out the Blue Point Games developed a remake that came out in 2018. Shadow of the Colossus is the magic of video games. The original on PlayStation 2 was one of the first games I played that translated a scale of enormity to 3D so successfully. I love the original very much, but there is a reason I only played it once, mainly the frame rate. The increase in frame rate of this remake enhances things astronomically, even if it does lose a bit of its graphical style in the process. But it goes such a long way to making the game that much more fun to play. I think it was a perfect way to update the game to 4K, and it does a really good job of carrying the same vibe as the original. Before I just sort of go straight to the Colossi, but here I found myself exploring off the beaten path due to the increased fidelity. Finishing Shadow of the Colossus gave me the perfect jump-off point to finally play yet another game on my 2025 pledge list, The Last Guardian. Wow, this game totally rules. I took the approach of just letting it surprise me. I played it like I was the first person to play it, and I refused to look up any help. There's no yellow paint showing you where to go, there's no skill trees to enhance your abilities, then there's no UI. Well, outside of the egregiously large on-screen tutorial text, I have no idea why they made those so big in a game that has such a clean presentation. Lots of people fell off this because they hated how unreliable your bird-lion combo best friend, Trico, doesn't always listen to you. I love this aspect, and it went so far to make it feel like a living creature, making it all the more sweet when Trico comes to save you at the last moment. Think of Trico as the Sophia tank from Blaster Master. You ride it until you have to disembark. Part of the experience is learning how to manipulate it with various tricks. The city that the game takes place inside this crater, has a verticality that puts even Shadow of the Colossus to shame. It truly feels inescapable, especially when you've climbed so high only to fall back down. As someone who hates heights, there's tons of bits in The Last Guardian that were just making my hands sweat. If there's anything that I've learned from Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and now The Last Guardian, is that these games always deliver a gut punch right at the end that'll be felt for a while. The ending here made me sad in a way that I wasn't expecting. Lastly for this segment, I wanted to briefly talk about the one big RPG re-release that I was really looking forward to this year, Lunar Remastered Collection. First off, let me say that it's awesome that these games are accessible to people who want to play them. I'm glad that they used the working design scripts, and whatever they did to the FMVs made them look pristine. That said, the in-game scaling of all the different elements, UI, character, background, they all look super messy and hodgepodged. I hoped maybe this would be fixed over time since Gung Ho did a ton of tweaks on the Grandia HD collection, outside of fixing the one issue that needed it the most, the smoothed out character sprites, but none of those fixes ever came in. This is going to sound absolutely ridiculous, but if you're looking for a nice 4K version of the first game to play, I highly recommend the iOS Touch version. It has tons of options for UI, difficulty, and more. It certainly looks a lot better than many of the elements in the remastered collection. If you can play it on an Apple TV or something like that, then I think you're going to love it.
I guess you did pass. You're a winner!
Lunar 2 ended up being a bit of a strange situation for me, but I did finally play it this year. This was a 2023 pledge game that I intended to play back-to-back with the first one, which obviously didn't happen. Even though the HD remaster had just been released, and even though I'm not quite the working designs fan that Coury is, I still felt compelled to play the game as it was when it released on PS1. I actually didn't care for the first game very much, at least not the PS1 version, but this second game was a massive improvement for me, primarily thanks to significantly better pacing, snappier battles, and I overall liked the characters a bit more too. I enjoyed my time with it all the way through to the end, where I felt satisfied with how things concluded with my hard-fought hour-long battle against the final boss. But unfortunately, the game had other ideas, locking what seems to be a happier ending behind an epilogue chapter that requires going through a few more dungeons, fighting a few more bosses, and after a bit of looking into what it would take to get through it, I thought I seemed to be a bit underleveled. I just didn't feel like I had any gas in the tank left to care about putting in the work required to see the epilogue ending. I mean, that final battle was really good. I was ready for it to end there. The credits rolled, the game was beat. I felt satisfied, so why push myself to do something further that I'm not feeling? Die-hard Lunar fans, including Coury, are surely incredulous that I've yet to tackle that epilogue, and at this point, maybe I never will. The game was good, quite good even, but it's not an all-timer for me or anything, and I feel like I got what I needed out of it. Anyway, let's forget about how upset you are over me shrugging off the Lunar 2 epilogue and get into my lightning round. I didn't do one of these last year because it was a bit of a down year for me in terms of games beaten, but this year, I'm definitely going to need it if I'm going to include most of the games I finished this year. All right, so here we go. Bunch of games, no more than 30 seconds each, starting with 6 pledge games from various years. Let's go. Wild Arms 4's story and characters have a bit of a reputation, but such factors may weigh less strongly for me. The story can honestly be good dumb fun with a decent message about not letting adult responsibilities blind you from right and wrong, although the localization makes it come off pretty cheesily. The pacing is fantastic, the new hex battle system is smart and fast, though a bit easy, and the side-scrolling sections are actually pretty good. Nice sub-30-hour JRPG. Capcom's Willow for NES always captured my imagination whenever I tried it at my cousin's house back in the day. Look how scary it is when monsters are on screen and the wind blows through the grass. With its pastel colors and fanciful music, it just has a vibe that's always stuck with me as distinctive for the NES. And now I finally played all the way through it. It can be rather maze-like, but I nonetheless found myself making steady progress. Give it a shot. I've always loved DMA Design's Body Harvest on N64, and Space Station Silicon Valley is another creative endeavor on their part in controlling many different vehicles, so to speak. Robotic animals in this case. It's got jank and frustrations aplenty, but on the whole, it's quite enjoyable, and I think it's so interesting to see how they made all of these varied animal abilities work in the early days of 3D. A clever platforming puzzler that N64 fans should check out for sure. Hyper Light Drifter. Now, here's a game that did absolutely nothing for me. Maybe it stood out in the indie scene of 2016. I've always heard nothing but praise for it, but in 2025, indie games with vibes like this are everywhere. I did not like the combat at all. The atmosphere was well done, but not too much my thing. I did like the open-ended approach to exploring the world, but I just wish I'd enjoyed my time here more than I did. Viva Pinata has long been the next game for me to cover in my Rare After Nintendo series, though I still feel that I also need to play Trouble in Paradise so that I can just put them in one video together. Anyway, I guess I've been putting it off for so long because this isn't really my genre, but I don't know. I never totally loved it, but I didn't hate playing it either. It's okay. These Xbox 360 graphics really do hold up crazy good in high res on Series X. Despite being one of my favorite games I played in 2019, I actually didn't quite finish The Impossible Lair of Yooka-Laylee and The Impossible Lair, the DKC-like platformer with great overhead exploration segments from former Rare developers. I rectified that this year, and yep, it's still fantastic. It's funny though, I was actually much closer to finishing The Impossible Lair back then than I thought I was. This is a wonderful antidote to Retro's DKC games for Rare DKC diehards. Speaking of DKC, did you know that Marsupilami Hoob Adventure is yet another DKC-inspired platformer? I remember seeing ads for the Marsupilami TV show when I was a kid, but never watched it. Although I learned much later that it's originally a Belgian comic popular in Europe. Anyway, unless you're a Marsupilami fan, this one is totally disposable gaming, but it ain't bad at all. worth a go if you like DKC. Monster Party is a strange NES game, one that has been calling to me ever since I first tried it a couple of years ago. I heeded that call, perhaps unwisely, but I do not regret it. It's actually not that difficult after the Shrimp Tempura boss in level 2, and it has infinite continues, so it's really not that tough to get through. It doesn't play great, but it doesn't play that badly either, and is worth a go just for the weirdness and monster movie gags. Batman the video game, or as I like to call it, Batman with a Gun, has long been a cheap Game Boy game that I figured I'd just pick up sometime. But the price started creeping up, and now you're lucky to find it for under $30. I did find it for a good deal this year, and it's indeed a fun little Game Boy romp. Play in a way that you can use Turbo Fire though. You'll need it for the last level and the Joker, trust me. Euphoria the Saga 2 has Sunsoft renew their in-house development efforts with excellent aesthetic and technical execution, but poor level design. The stage layouts changing every time you pass through may have been meant to relieve tedium, but it just caused me to bumble around without much of any idea as to how to go from one place to another or pursue an objective. And there are way more text boxes to get through than there should be in a retro action game. I continued my Mortal Kombat story mode efforts with Mortal Kombat 11. Compared to the 9th game, the story in the 10th game wasn't as interesting and the gameplay was just a bit too fast for me. But both aspects were shifted back towards my taste with Mortal Kombat 11. These really are like watching a 6 to 10 hour TV series, so even if you're like me and not really a fighting game fan, you can still get a lot out of these newer MK games. The Cruisin' series and Fast and Furious arcade games have an interesting intermingled history. And when I saw the trailer for the new Fast and Furious Arcade Edition for home consoles this year, I was like, whoa, wait, this is just Cruisin' Blast, right? Yes and no. It feels like Raw Thrills might have handed over their project files as a starting point for development here, but the end result is a lot less wacky and less fun to play. Very disposable entertainment from the game mill. I loved revisiting Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door with its shiny Switch remake, even if it's a frame rate downgrade from GameCube. It's probably the darkest scenario ever developed for a Mario game, but it also has hints of things that sank the series for me for so many years, such as the setup for jokes being you being coerced into super tedious tasks. It's still a top-tier Mario RPG, of course, but this replay did solidify Origami King as my controversial pick for Best Paper Mario. I wanted to not want to buy the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, but I talked myself into it because I thought it would be a useful video production tool, testing various video modes, demonstrating certain graphical techniques, etc. It was actually pretty neat to see Nintendo getting technical for once, and the informative tidbits were occasionally interesting enough, such as how the Joy-Con gap exists so that you can't easily get leverage to pull them off. There's way too many mouse minigames though. On the Twitch Backloggery streams, we celebrated the year of the PlayStation for the PlayStation's 30th anniversary and knocked many PS1 games off my backlog, including Spider-Man, which I think is still a really nice looking game, though some of the level design and boss design can be pretty frustrating. Driver, which I remember a friend buying on day one just for the cinematic director replay mode. So the game is definitely nostalgic for me, but the campaign is super unforgiving when it comes to fail states and ruthless cop car pursuit. Jumping Flash, which is just such a great early exploration of 3D platforming, from a first-person perspective no less, and it still works so well and is just so fun. Tenchu Stealth Assassins, which I always wanted to play more of, but was afraid it would be too rough and clunky. Actually, it's a lot more intuitive and easy to control than you might think. I enjoyed it a lot. Einhander, which is a horizontal shooter from Squaresoft. Not their usual genre, and not mine either. Maybe it takes a shmup outsider to make a shmup for a shmup outsider. Sorry for saying shmup, Coury. But I freaking love this game and its selection of weapons and weapon management systems, even though it's very hard. Parasite Eve 2, which shocked me with how great it is and what a technical showpiece it is for the PS1 because no one really talks about it. I get the impression that people tend to overwhelmingly prefer the first game, which I did eventually finish and mostly enjoyed, but this one is kind of more my style, honestly, with better feeling combat that still allows you to pause the action and select spells. And Kudelka, which is a super cool horror JRPG with some of the most interesting voice acting on PS1.
Why don't you ask the bullets who's being ridiculous?
You idiots!
They actually used an early form of motion capture, and the result against the pre-rendered backgrounds feels like a stage play. It's unlike anything else I've ever seen from this generation. The combat is a bit overly easy throughout, but the whole thing comes together as just wonderfully distinct. I can't wait to play the Shadow Hearts games now. Lastly, even though it wasn't on my own backlog, you need to know about Home Safety Hotline, which made for super fun streams in both October and December thanks to its Christmas DLC. You operate a computer for a call center in 1996 to help people diagnose and resolve household hazards. But soon enough, you'll graduate from identifying black mold and moles to cryptids, fairies, and stranger things. Play with friends or family to debate and have a laugh. All right then. So, I feel really good about how well I cleaned up with my pledge games this past year. I had carryover games remaining from 2023 and 2024, both of which were years that we ill-advisedly picked 10 games each for our pledge lists. For 2025, we picked 4 games for our own lists, which for me were Tomb Raider, Wild Arms 4, The Eternal Cylinder, and Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, and pick 1 game for each other's lists, which Coury chose as Yakuza Kiwami for me. Now, if you watched this whole episode, you might have noticed that I finished every single one of those. So for the first time since we began doing pledge games, no one has any reason to be very cross with me. At least in regard to 2025 pledges. Carryover pledges from 2023 were Lunar 2, Trails of Cold Steel, Hyper Light Drifter, Viva Pinata, all of which I beat this year, and Ys 8, which I didn't beat. From 2024, I had Blinks the Time Sweeper, Willow, Space Station Silicon Valley, Jack 2, Sekiro, all of which I beat this year, and Dark Savior, which I didn't beat. So, I don't know, I think finishing 14 pledge games across 3 years of pledges is pretty darn good, right? I mean, maybe I should be a little bit embarrassed, I don't know. But it's not good enough. So, in regard to Ys 8 and Dark Savior, you'll have to continue being very cross with me. But I'm extremely confident that I can handle getting through those 2 in addition to my new pledges for 2026, which are Light Crusader, The Legend of Dragoon, Onimusha Warlords, and The Evil Within 2. And for Coury, I challenge you to beat Luigi's Mansion 3. And so, if I somehow can't handle all that, then I want you to be very cross with me.
Alright, I've still got a few games left to cover, so I'll try to move a bit faster here. Some of these I didn't finish or play a ton, but I thought it was worth highlighting them very quickly. So yeah, this is not going to be a proper lightning round, but it's close enough. Abzu is a sort of spiritual successor to Journey, and was developed by a number of the members of that core team. This time we're exploring an underwater world instead of the desert and up the side of a mountain. It's a good way to spend a couple of hours, and it's beautiful in a lot of ways, especially when you see these big swirling schools of fish. But it didn't really have the emotional core that made Journey so special. What's better than 5 dates? 10 dates, of course. It was, fine.
Okay.
Despite being a fan of the Jedi Knight games, I'd never actually played the first Dark Forces game. So Star Wars Dark Forces Remastered from Night Dive Studios was an obvious must-play for me. I gotta say, I love playing these Star Wars games that come from an era before the prequels and sequels and shows and all that stuff. From a time when anything outside of the original trilogy still felt alluring and full of potential. Hopefully we'll eventually get a Night Dive port of Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. Clearly, the developers at Bitmap Bureau feel a lot like me, that Terminator 2 is one of the greatest movies of all time and deserves a game to match. Terminator 2D No Fate feels like the spiritual successor to the Sega CD game in the best possible way, and holds steadfastly to 16-bit sensibilities. Perhaps to a fault, but still, it's a great little old-school action game that seems like it could have truly come out in 1994. Fans of the movie will love every moment of this, while others might feel that it's way too expensive for what it is. I had the fortune of buying a Japanese copy of Musha Aleste a couple of years back for an extremely decent price. At least this one is a lot more affordable than the US version. Well, unless you steal it. Anyway, it took until 2025 for me to finally play through it, and it totally lives up to the hype. As far as vertical shooters on the Genesis go, I think this might be among the best that I've ever played. I grabbed the digital collection of the Life is Strange games a while back, and started the first game, Life is Strange Remastered, one Friday evening, and played through one chapter for the next several days. What starts out as an interesting mystery goes in unexpected directions, including time travel far into the past and changing people's fates, and the heartbreaking results that can come from changing one's destiny. Great characters, mechanics, and music throughout, but I just don't have a lot of interest in playing the Before the Storm prequel. Maybe I'll just jump to 2 instead.
Yum, that looks tasty.
In late October, I was joined by my neighbor Katie to play the well-liked horror game Outlast on stream. I'd forgotten just how fun it could be to play this type of game in a pass-the-controller type of couch co-op situation. I respected that Outlast never puts a weapon in the main character's hand, and the video camera with the night vision is a super cool gimmick. In the end, we weren't too fond of the supernatural direction that the story goes in, although I guess I should have seen it going that way.
Yeah, I read the disclaimer. I expected this to perhaps happen. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I was like, okay, Coury, is there any streaming etiquette I should know? And he said, well, we're trying to do a family-friendly channel. And I was like, okay. I don't know if you know much about the game we're playing, but...
It's only funny because like that was like literally the discussion beforehand. I'm like, oh, we try not to swear. but male frontal nudity is totally fine.
Yeah.
I really liked the Ninja Warriors in the arcade, but I don't think that the games truly clicked with me until I played the Ninja Saviors Return of the Warriors from Tango Project on the Switch in 2019, where it ended up being my game of the year. I had a chance to pick up a decently nice copy of the SNES original that Return of the Warriors was a remake of last year. Clearly the remake was so good because the original bones were so good. The SNES version was great. Still, it's amazing just how much better the Tango Project remake is. Like Wild Guns Reloaded, it's cool to see where it came from, but the Ninja Saviors is more than a total replacement for that original. Who would have ever thought that mixing Adventure Island with Zelda 2 would work? But that's exactly what Super Adventure Island 2 is. I prefer the first one overall, but it's really interesting to see that they took this approach for the sequel. It moves at a pretty decent clip, but I don't know if I'll ever want to replay it. In the end, it took about 6 hours to whip all those weenies to smithereenies. The only mainline Ys game that I've never finished is Ys 5. Since Falcom doesn't seem like they ever want to do a remake of that one, I figured I may as well play the fan translation of Ys 5 Lost Kefin Kingdom of Sand on the Super Famicom. It has a bad reputation, so I think I was anticipating the worst. And I think that this approach helped me enjoy this one a decent bit. It's clear to me how this was laying the groundwork for the gameplay style of Ys 6, Oath and Felghana, and Origin. It feels similar in a lot of ways, specifically in the jumping and platforming. Speaking of which, Ys, Oath and Felghana was released for modern consoles this year. I hadn't played it since the PSP, so revisiting it was so much fun. It moves at a pretty consistent clip and you'll wrap it up probably under 10 hours. If you're looking for a place to start with the Ys series, this is a perfectly acceptable answer. After a couple of false restarts, I figured it was time to really commit to the PS1 darling Ape Escape. Built around the DualShock controller, I can appreciate how experimental it is, and the straight-up PS1-ness of it all will always be charming. I just wish I liked it more. I'm not gonna call it quits here though, as I'd like to at least give the second game a shot to see if it does more for me. Although I didn't think they'd be anything special when ordering them, the Toaplan Arcade Collections 1 and 2 are super well done multi-game packages, and they even have much better ways to play certain games versus other re-releases, specifically Batsagun. The version here is way better than the City Connection developed Batsagun Saturn Tribute Boosted. Still, these collections are both packed with some great titles and have tons of interesting features and tweaks, and lag doesn't feel bad to me at all either. Capcom has been killing it with their multi-game collections. Out this year was the fantastic Capcom Fighting Collection 2, which contains a whole bunch of late 90s, early 2000s fighters that have been long deserving of a re-release. Happy to have a version of Power Stone on a modern console. I originally bought the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles themed roguelite, Splintered Fate, on the Nintendo Switch. I did 7 or 8 runs, but it's incredibly ugly on that system and ran at a not amazing frame rate. So I didn't end up spending much time with it. Now that the Switch 2 upgrade is out, maybe this will help me fill my roguelike quota for 2026. I didn't spend nearly enough time playing rounds of PGA 2K23 with CGQ Chris this year. We'd set it up where we'd play a round of golf, but you watch each other hit the ball, and then just hang out on voice chat as if we were really hanging out playing golf together. It was so much fun. I've only got about 3 hours into it so far, but Demon School from Necrosoft Games has so much passion to it that I am definitely going to play it more fully in the new year. Neon Inferno is another good as heck game from Retroware. Developed by the same team as Steel Assault, this is a serious glow up, and I really love that game. This is just bigger and better on every level. Mixing run and gun that feels similar to Gunner's Heaven on the PS1, with the background gallery shooting of Dick Tracy on the Genesis. Stir in some bullet deflecting slow motion action, and you got a stew going. Quality shines through from even the most unexpected places. The shootout with the synthwave vocal track playing behind it was a great moment. Polar opposite from Neon Inferno was Death Wish Enforcers, a game whose idea is sound, Sunset Riders, but instead, 70s movie action heroes. From the Shimmer City scaling to the impossible to avoid falling signs, there's a sense of unfinishedness about it. I guess this got a patch for the Steam version that makes it a much better game, but for some reason, that update never made it to consoles. I'd love to play a good version of this. The job that Try did with his pledge list is outstanding, while my failure streak once again continued. But you know what? I'm not going to beat myself up over it because, hey, I think I played more games this year than I have in ages. I think I had more fun playing video games this year than I have in a long time. Out of my 5 that I had for 2025, the only one that I didn't get to is Lost Odyssey. So I guess we're going to throw that on the list along with my 2023 and 2024 remaining pledges. Undertale, The Witcher 3, Brave Fencer Musashi, The Last Story, Psychonauts, Landstalker, Paradise Killer, Lufia 2, The Outer Wilds, and Crystallis. Let's see how many of those I can get knocked out in 2026, along with my new pledges. Magic Knight Rayearth, Eternal Darkness, Banjo-Kazooie, 3D Dot Game Heroes, and Try, I challenge you to play Control.
"2025 was not an easy year to announce, release, or sell electronics in. So we congratulate everyone who navigated those challenges, and we wish you continued success in the new year. Fingers crossed for RAM prices to reduce and stabilize, especially for Valve's sake, but I'm optimistic that the release of the Steam machine will further boost Linux's continued trajectory toward being a platform where I might actually enjoy PC gaming. Who knows? And on the games front, I'm looking forward to Resident Evil 9, and I'm curious about whatever unknown delights are in the pipeline for Switch 2, hopefully with proper non-keycard physicals. And did you hear? Rumor has it that we'll be talking about Half-Life 3 in the games we played in 2026. Think it's true, or did I just jinx it? Join us in 2026, and let's find out together.